When it comes to all the videos on this channel, I could always say that the McDonald's documentary, The History of McDonald's, is the one that has brought most of you guys to check out my little corner of the internet. For those of you new to the channel, or you just didn't know, this YouTube channel is basically a byproduct of the Industrial Industries World Radio podcast that I started in 2019. Now, the YouTube channel, the first couple of years were basically just some food reviews and maybe some funny skits here and there. Basically what you see now. But it was nothing that was monumental per se as the history of this or the history of that documentaries that I do. For those of you that want a nice little pull back of the curtain, want to see how the history of McDonald's documentary came to be, you are in the right place, you are watching the right video, and you are not lost. So to give you the idea of the step-by-step process of how I made this documentary, it really started with me being fascinated about the history of so many things that I grew up with and loved. One was McDonald's, one was Toys R Us, one was weird gum, novelty gum such as Chewology. It was made by a company called Amurol, which is now bought by Wrigley. But I did a whole history of them. It's very fascinating stuff. I want to do a documentary eventually on that. So in the early years of the podcast, it was a big variety show. It was just like food review, funny skit, maybe a funny song, maybe a 20-minute block of the history of something, and move on to the next thing. Maybe an interview with some guy I know, whatever. But slowly and surely over time, I just got more and more fascinated with the history of things to the point where an episode would be completely just about the history of something, like an audio documentary per se. Okay, so it was late October 2019, I set up the podcast. I had the YouTube channel out, but there really wasn't much happening with the channel. I was just focused on making the podcast the biggest thing that it could be. Now, I was very, very optimistic at the time. Starting a podcast without being a part of a network, or you don't have any big friends or anywhere in the industry, or you're not a celebrity, then no one is going to find your podcast in the first place. You're going to be buried amongst the huge truckloads, landfill worths of podcasts, and you're going to be lost in the mix. I learned that the first couple of years of podcasting, but I just went in hard. I was just had this mindset of if I just put out quality stuff, I am going to rise above everything else. And I did, and just like the downloads still to this day, 53 downloads, one of the episodes, and it was just an uphill battle to the point where you're stepping on spikes every step and people are just throwing fireballs at you from above. I mean, my goal for the podcast in the first place was just something fun to do, obviously, keep me busy, but also maybe grab a little bit of a following and, people would actually care enough to write in and ask me questions and I could answer them and just reciprocate that. Just that at least. It had nothing to do with like, oh, I'll get it big and I'm going to be like Joe Rogan, make $1 million a year, dude. So it was nothing like that. But during this time, in the middle of 2020, summertime, I decided to do the history of McDonald's. So the first thing I did whenever I'd be wanting to do a nice little history of something, go to Wikipedia. Now, going to Wikipedia for all of your information, I highly suggest you expand your horizons and triple check, quadruple check Wikipedia because there is a lot of wrong information in there. But it is a good base to stand on before you jump and search through the realm of everything else that is the history of something. So what I do when I start any documentary is a timeline. Okay, when was the company or whatever thing started? And then look at who made the thing, said business, whatever. And then you look at their lives. You go back even further, see how they started and how they got to the point to start that business or make that thing. And all of that stuff really fascinates me because most of the time you really do learn that a lot of these people that made it big had a whole huge story prior to that. A lot of failures, a lot of struggles. And that's when I thought of like Ray Kroc as somebody that just kept pushing. He was like having health problems, diabetes, like all that stuff in his like 50s when he decided to take on McDonald's as his own thing. You know, buy it from the McDonald brothers and take it to the next level. I'm not saying that he founded it, so let's just calm down. So, what do you do when you read everything you could read on Wikipedia and you looked at the McDonald's wiki? You have a nice little timeline, but there are a lot of holes in between. I'm like, okay, I need to dig deeper and then also look at some of these conflicting facts that I read on Wikipedia and then on this website and then this newspaper article. So I got to sort all of this out. So I wound up buying Grinding It Out by Ray Kroc, written with the help of Robert Anderson. And it is an autobiographical account strictly from Ray Kroc's mouth of how he basically made McDonald's what it is today. And he talks a lot about his life and all his struggles and how he got to meeting the McDonald brothers in the first place. Now, this is the biggest source that I took from when I was writing out everything. So, the documentary, the podcast episode, sounds like it leans very much towards favoring Ray Kroc, which, me personally, I really do love Ray Kroc, what he did. He's an admirable man doing what he did. People will say that, oh, I favored Ray Kroc more than the McDonald brothers, but the McDonald brothers didn't write a book. Like, there are a few interviews of them online and some news articles, but besides that, they were just like these humble, quiet dudes that really didn't want to say anything. After Ray Kroc bought McDonald's, they just kind of went back to New Hampshire and disappeared. And so for the most part, how McDonald's came to be and all the big milestones came from Ray Kroc, and it was documented in this book. Early June, I started reading this book and taking notes. Like every page, I would look at it and be like, okay, is there anything here that I need to fill into the history as I'm writing up this script for the podcast episode? And okay, there's some things there. All right, that's good. I want to know, did he mention anything about the McRib? Did he say anything there? Okay, all right, let's put that in there. You know, and so I read the entire book and just reread it and just looked at every single thing that he mentioned in here to fill in the gaps and also myself like write out a nice story and plot it out and pace it out to the point to where it's listenable. It would be a nice, you know, informative piece of audio. So I wrote out the entire script and got everything taken care of, double checked, triple checked everything, and started looking up on newspaper articles and everything else where this book left off in basically the 70s, 80s. Ray Kroc died in 84, so, you know, there's about 30 years afterwards that I needed to fill in, and that's when I started, you know, typing in, searching things, and I would find other things such as, you know, the McDLT. I would find the concept of Mini-Max. Like, all of this other stuff that I'm like, I want to do separate things on this. I want to do a history of that, a history of this, a history of that in future podcast episodes. So that's where, you know, I did a nice, big, condensed history of McDonald's. And then after that, I plan to make other episodes to go more in depth, such as the Shamrock Shake and the McPizza, McNugget dips. So anyways, July 17th, 2020, I put out the History of McDonald's podcast episode on my feed. And to date, the episode has a, drumroll, 153 downloads. That includes plays, not someone physically hitting download on the thing, too. So, I mean, for the amount of work I put into it, I was just like, oh. But that didn't dissuade me. I was just like, yeah, well, that's typical to everything else I've done, which I've put in, you know, a lot of effort into. Let's just keep going. So I just kept making podcast episode after podcast episode of the history of this, how Ghostbusters 1984, the first movie, was made. I did a huge episode on that. It has 67 downloads. Very, very big. So then we get to April of 2021, and I was kind of getting bored of making podcast episodes, and I was just getting bored in general, and I wanted to do something more. And it's like, okay, I have a nice heap of audio work that I've done now for all these subjects. Maybe I'll start taking some of these audio podcast episodes and putting them on YouTube. So I took the history of Toys R Us, and I was like, okay, I'll make a nice thumbnail, put the audio over it, and call it a day. Just, one image, and people could just listen to it. But then I was thinking, well, what if I just decided to make some little graphics here and there and put in some old commercial footage and maybe then kind of tie it in with what I'm saying? Maybe I'll do that. So I decided to get into making a nice little timeline with the graphics, 1940, 1950, and so on, and what happened during this decade of its history. Put the text in there, and then I decided to intertwine it with some footage of whatever. And as I was making it, I was like, I want to make something that I would personally want to watch. And I looked on YouTube, and there really wasn't like a full, thorough video on the history of Toys R Us. So I decided to say, okay, yeah, let's do all I can with the limited amount of stuff I have to work with video-wise for documentaries, and make something decent that goes along with this podcast episode I recorded ages ago. So on May 2nd, 2021, I put out the history of Toys R Us, full documentary. And I want to say about a month after that, I started seeing my subscribers go from 40 or whatever to 100. And I was like, whoa. I get it, though. I put out a decent video that would make people want to subscribe. So I'm like, okay, yeah, well, cool. Right on. Right on, dude. So after that, I was sitting there thinking, what other podcast episode did I make that I really loved and I could make in documentary form? Oh, the history of McDonald's. And so I decided to make the whole documentary in 4 different parts, because this whole thing was like an hour and a half or an hour and 20 minutes long. I don't know how long it is, but regardless, it was big, and I had to break it up in pieces because I could only take so much of doing it, to the point to where I'm like, I need to take a breather and take a break. So when I started digging into making the documentary on McDonald's, I was like, this can't be how I did Toys R Us. I really got to make sure I have everything in line and in order to make this happen. So what I wound up doing is going on eBay and buying actual things that I needed to show in the video, and that was pretty costly. So I was like spending all of my money on this stuff, and I knew I wasn't going to be making any money on the videos at all because I wasn't monetized or anything. And so I was just like, hey, I love it though. When I make this video, at least I could say, this is something that I enjoy watching and I made it myself, So I just took the big audio block that was the history of McDonald's, and I just loaded it on in, and I'm like, okay, time to get to work, make some visuals, put the documentary together, make some graphics, and yeah, I say it took a month or so to put out the first part, which was about 20 minutes long. And so by June 19th, 2021, I put out the first chapter of the history of McDonald's, and, it got like 1,000 views within the first month or two. It wasn't really like a big thing. And then I decided, okay, well, that's better than most of my videos that got 10 views, 20 views. Well, regardless of how many views it gets, I'm in it now. I gotta finish this thing. So then I put out the second chapter, and then the third chapter. And then as I was finishing up the fourth chapter and completely finishing up the entire history of McDonald's, I wanted to put out the fourth chapter and then take all 4 chapters and put them into one video, which wound up being the full documentary history of McDonald's from 1938 to today. Now, when I put out this documentary on McDonald's, it was November 26th, 2021. And this video didn't reach 1,000 views until the next year in mid-January. So I was just like, oh, this is another thing that isn't going anywhere. Great. I'm just like, hey, such is life with anything I've done. All the music that I poured my heart and time into, nothing, I'm like, this is parts of the course with anything I did. Well, now, a few years later, there's a trend that I've noticed that if you put out a banger of a YouTube video and nothing happens, don't let it dissuade you or make you feel down about it. Because sometimes it will take 6, 8 months for it to get any sort of traction and people to care about it. I will say any advice I would give any person out there making YouTube is make something you like. Make something that you know you will fully enjoy and be like, oh yeah, I would click on that video. So it just comes down to making something that you at the end of the day feel proud of doing and saying, you know what, I put all my effort and productivity into this thing and I am proud of it because I know it is a good quality thing. And that's with anything in life, like, raising children or building something or sewing clothes, whatever it is. As long as you could say you were happy and you were productive with what you did, that's all that matters. Because if you go at anything with that intention, soon enough, people will catch on and enjoy what you're doing as well. So as you see here, I have a whole bunch of stuff. This ain't my entire McDonald's collection, but here is a slip from the 60s that McDonald's would write out their orders onto. Here's a Egg McMuffin styrofoam container. Here's a Big Mac styrofoam container. Here is a chopped beefsteak styrofoam container with their chopped beefsteak sandwiches that they had for a little bit. I think in 1979 or 78, I'm not sure. But here is something really cool. This is McDonald's home fried chicken. And what year is this from? This is from 1968. I found this on eBay, and I wound up buying it for like 75 bucks, which I still haven't used this for anything in a video, but soon enough I will do a video on McDonald's fried chicken at some point. But yeah, that is basically how I made the McDonald's documentary. I started making it audio-wise and writing out the entire narrative in May or June of 2020, and finally got the documentary out in November of 2021, and the rest is history. Since then, I put out a massive amount of documentaries, and I enjoy doing them more than any other video, but they just take a lot of time and a lot of work, and I'm always working on a documentary in the background, and whenever I finish it, I will put it out and just keep rolling. There you go, guys. That is how I made the McDonald's documentary. Thank you all for watching, and thank you for checking me out and subscribing and all that stuff ever since then. And I appreciate y'all. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.